A used new 3DS XL and an AYN Thor Lite will cost you about the same amount of money right now, somewhere in the $200 to $300 range depending on where you buy it. One of them plays 3DS games exactly the way it was designed to play them, and the other one can also play PS2, GameCube, Wii U, and a chunk of Switch, so the Thor is the obvious pick, right? Except it's not quite the clear winner you might think, so let's get into it. So why does this comparison exist at all? So both of these are dual screen clamshells, and the AYN Thor runs Azahar, which as a recent update gives it dual screen support, so they can both display dual screen games on their dual screens, so that's good. The vast majority of the 3DS library runs just fine, or at least quite well, on the AYN Thor, even on the Lite. So they both run the same libraries essentially. But the other day, catching up on my now 2-year-old save file of Bowser's Inside Story for 3DS, using my AYN Thor Max, you know, the one with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 and the 16 gigs of RAM and the terabyte SSD, like, you know, the most powerful config of the thing. And even on that jacked up config, I got some stutters while I was playing the game. And yeah, they were brief, and thankfully it's a top-down RPG, so it didn't really affect the gameplay too much, but I did notice it. It did take me out of it for a second, and it's not a stutter that exists on the native hardware. And then later in a battle, when you're using either those Bros moves or the Bowser and his minions moves, about half of those rely on some very precise bottom touchscreen work to make sure that you're either batting back enemies to keep your hit rate consistent on the enemy, or aligning bomb bombs in time, or whatever. You know, if you played the game, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't, you're super missing out, because the Super Mario RPGs are, in a word, underrated. Just go play Superstar Saga and you know what I'm talking about. But with these touchscreen intensive games, I could pretty consistently get to a good or great level, but excellent was very hard to hit. And I've played a decent handful of these Mario RPG games now, so I almost always hit excellent. And you know where I've always hit excellent on the touchscreen based games? On the native 3DS. So these kind of gaps and differences are the start of what led me down making this video. The question of, hey Coulter, I've got $250 to spend. Should I buy a 3DS or should I buy a Thor? The 3DS has been popping off the last couple years, as is clearly seen with the video I made in like the first few months of the channel, and it's now at like 500,000 views. Like that video like got this channel monetized, so thank you to you guys and the 3DS in general for that. Whereas in the other corner there's the AYN Thor, which is so popular that I think it's even being covered by news outlets outside of the retro emulation niche community, because the idea of a modern DS that can also play PS2 games is sick to a lot of people, as it should be. So first off, the case for the modded 3DS. So the modded 3DS, specifically the 2014 era, the new 3DS or new 3DS XL with the stronger processor, is for a specific kind of person. And that person should definitely be buying the 3DS over the Thor. First off, native hardware means no emulation overhead. So the stutter I mentioned before that I experienced on my Thor Max, no matter how much beef we threw at that game, it still stuttered, but that stutter would be completely gone on a native 3DS because you're running that code right on the bare metal as it was intended to. The 3DS and new 3DS are not more powerful than the Thor by any means. They're not by a long shot, but any 3DS game is built to run on that silicon, and that's always going to be the smoothest experience possible. Another issue I did not expect playing 3DS games on the Thor is screen geometry and alignment. And what I mean by that is certain 3DS games were designed with certain gameplay mechanics expecting the top screen and the bottom screen to be a certain aspect ratio and a certain size, so that the developers could say drop a ball from the top screen and perfectly align so that the ball seamlessly fell through to the bottom screen, making you feel like it was one big display and connected experience, which, you know, it should be. However, the AYN Thor screens are different sizes. The top is 6 inches and the bottom is 3.92, and that physical geometry is not the same as the original 3DS hardware. So for most games, you won't notice. Often they just tossed like a map on the bottom and then the top screen was where all the action was. But for ones where you need to follow something specifically from the top screen to receive it on the bottom, also like in some of those Mario RPG battle mechanics, you might find it kind of hard to anticipate where that item is going to land when you only have about a millisecond of lead on where it'll actually show up on the bottom screen. And yes, you could probably solve this by digging into the settings and setting a custom size for the top screen so that its size is more clamped to what the dimension would have been on the original 3DS. But I did look and I didn't see an easy setting that said force original geometry, so you'd likely have to set some manual scaler, and even if it is configurable, it's still another point of friction worth talking about. Another point in the case for the 3DS is the stylus. So the 3DS has a resistive touchscreen with a plastic stylus that lives inside the chassis. Nice and easy to store, hard to lose. We all lost them anyway, but at least it had a home.
That's your home! Are you too good for your home? Answer me!
Whereas the AYN Thor has a capacitive touchscreen, like, you know, any smartphone these days, that expects your finger or a modern stylus that did not come in the box of the AYN Thor and does not store inside of anything. There's no home for that ball. For a good chunk of 3DS games, this probably doesn't matter. Many will just use the button layout and scarcely use the touchscreen at all. Some, like the Ocarina of Time remaster, only require you to touch the touchscreen to like change an item every now and again. But then there are some that do require quite precise movements on the touchscreen, such as, say, if you're gonna play some classic DS games, Star Fox Command, where you're drawing your paths of where you want your ships to go, or all those mini games in New Super Mario Bros. Where you have to like draw the trampolines to bounce Mario around so he doesn't like, fall to his death. Or, you guessed it, the battle mechanics in the Mario RPGs, which I ran against. Those third-party styluses that are meant for a capacitive screen do a decent enough job, but their job is to simulate a human finger, and so it's pretty hard to tell exactly where the pinpoint tip of the input is gonna be when you're trying to move things around in a particular manner. And I found it quite finicky to try and dial in the right pressure and angle to have it register exactly how I was wanting it to, but maybe your mileage will vary, or you're just fine with using your finger and you just know exactly where your fingertip ends up on the screen. I don't know your hands. That'd be weird. Then there's the 3D, which is kind of the elephant in the room, given it's the 3DS. Like, I know making things 3D was a huge 2010s fad, and I know it's currently 2026, but stay with me. So obviously the 3DS's claim to fame was it had the auto stereoscopic screen, no glasses, the 3D just worked. It was honestly pretty cool, and if you have a modded 3DS, especially if you follow my tutorial on how to mod your 3DS down below, wherever that's linked, you can do other cool things like install Red Viper, the homebrew Virtual Boy emulator, and run any Virtual Boy game in actual 3D without glasses on the thing. Like, there's some pretty cool stuff unlocked by the 3DS's actual 3D auto stereoscopic screen, whereas the AYN Thor did not invest in making an auto stereoscopic screen, which given the current price of the AYN Thor is probably good, because that would just make the price even higher. But nonetheless, no 3D on the Thor. On top of all of that, for those of you who actually care about the size of the device you lug around with you in your daily carry, the 3DS is also lighter and thinner, even on the highest end new 3DS XL. So if you care about things fitting in your jacket pockets, then that does matter. So with all that said, the 3DS is for the person who wants the 3DS library the way it was made, not emulated, native. And if you care about screen geometry and the games aligning and playing like they're supposed to, resistive stylus precision, real stereoscopic 3D, playing on a lighter and thinner device, and overall playing on original native Nintendo hardware, then a modded 3DS is irreplaceable for what it does. It's just not a broader emulation device. Like, the ceiling is essentially some N64 and PS1, and that's about as high you can dream to go on emulating on the modded 3DS. Now before we switch gears to the Thor, quick shout out to JustWave for sponsoring this video. JustWave is an on-demand custom manufacturing service, CNC machining, 3D printing, sheet metal fabrication, injection molding, you name it. And for a channel where I'm constantly modding things, building mounts, or needing some specific bracket that just doesn't exist on Amazon for me to buy, having somewhere that I can upload a Fusion 360 file and actually, get it made properly is genuinely useful. The workflow is clean. You upload your design, pick your material and process, get an instant quote, and they handle production from there. Turnaround can be as fast as 24 hours in some orders. They've also got a hobby and DIY category clearly aimed at people doing exactly the kind of stuff we do on this channel. People who love to tinker and make weird stuff and, turn a Wii into a GameCube and strap it to a chair like we did in a recent very badly performing video. So if you've been stuck on a project because you needed a custom part you couldn't find anywhere, go ahead and check the link in the description, and thank you so much to JustWave for sponsoring this video. As for the AYN Thor, the Thor's case is simpler and harder to argue with, which in a word is breadth. A Thor on a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2, that's the base model at $329 US, Pro at $409 US, or either of the max tiers. Those will run the vast majority of the 3DS library on Azahar quite well, albeit with the occasional stutter or blip like I mentioned earlier. But then you can close that game and then quickly hop over to GameCube, PS2, Wii, most of Wii U, a solid chunk of Switch, and even lighter to some mid-tier PC titles through things like Game Native and Game Hub, which is insane. Whereas the 3DS cannot touch any of that, so the ceiling difference is not subtle. The battery life is not close either. The AYN Thor has a 6,000 mAh battery, whereas the new 3DS XL does maybe 3.5 to 6 hours on 3DS software, and your unit cells have probably degraded a fair bit since they were factory. And so even though my Thor is emulating 3DS, it often outlasts my actual 3DS and 3DS gameplay, so that's a bit of a clincher there. The Thor also outputs via USB-C DisplayPort, 4K on the base and above, 1080p on the light, so you can actually hook it up to a TV and dock it, whereas the 3DS has no video output unless you want to go through a very invasive and finicky mod that I have not been bold enough to try yet on mine, but let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. And hot tip, the Thor Lite actually runs a Snapdragon 865 chip, not the 8 Gen 2 in every other tier. The Lite will still handle 3DS quite well, PS2, GameCube, and Wii, but Wii U becomes hit or miss, and Switch emulation gets a lot more selective with certain titles. So it's still a solid device, and the 865 chip has great driver maturity and handles most of what people actually play. But definitely research the Snapdragon 865 compatibility for your specific titles and emulation you want to be doing before taking the plunge and assuming that you'll be able to play the full breadth of the Switch library on it. So all that said, the Thor is for the person who wants one device that covers a wide library and is okay with 3DS being really good rather than perfect. If the screen geometry, stylus precision, and the stereoscopic 3D aren't things you'd notice or really care about or happy to work around, then the Thor does a lot more with the same-ish money, plain and simple. A used new 3DS XL in 2026 runs between maybe $200 US to $350 on eBay, which is kind of wild, but yeah, 3DS prices have spiked a lot over the last couple years because people realized they were kind of goated, and now they're obviously harder to come by because they're not being made anymore. But if you search carefully on your local Facebook Marketplace, Kijiji, Craigslist, you can probably find one for about 120 to 200 bucks, I'd say, depending on where you are, of course. Whereas, like we said, the Thor Lite kicks things off at $259, with the base Thor Lite that gets you the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 at $329. So the price overlap is pretty in the ballpark there. So at those similar price points, you're choosing between one device that plays one library really perfectly, and not just 3DS library. It'll play the DS library perfectly. It can also emulate Game Boy, Game Boy Advance, NES, Super Nintendo. You know, the 3DS can do a good handful of solid retro gaming as well. Whereas the Thor will play all of that, albeit maybe not quite as perfectly, but it adds a number more consoles. So if you're just looking to play the broadest possible library for the money, which is a pretty fair request given 2026 and buying a device to game on is getting more and more expensive, then I'd say probably go for the Thor. Base tier above, and only upgrade from there if you know you'll need the RAM or storage for, like, you know, trying to play some of your older Steam library on the thing. And if you already own a 3DS, mod it. Definitely mod it if you're comfortable with that, or get a friend who knows what they're doing to mod it, because the homebrew scene is still very active. It's free to mod it, it's just a soft mod, takes about an hour. And a modded 3DS is just plain better than an unmodded one in every possible way because it unlocks a whole lot of cool stuff you can do with it. And like I covered in my The 3DS is Awesome video that I'll link somewhere down below. By the way, if you've watched this far into the video and you found any and all of this helpful or entertaining in any way, if you hadn't subscribed yet, now'd be a great time to do so. It's just that little button down there. It'll play a little animation for you when you click it. So thanks so much. But all this said, the 3DS is not obsolete just because something else can emulate it. Emulation isn't native hardware, not for screen geometry, not for stylus input, not for stereoscopic 3D, not for native silicon or any of that. The Thor just simply covers more ground, whereas the 3DS covers its own ground exactly right. So which one wins depends on what you're actually wanting to play and how you want to experience those games. But let me know in the comments which camp you're in. Are you going to hold on to real hardware, or has a modern emulation handheld stolen your heart? Go ahead and drop a joystick emoji for 3DS hardware, or a robot emoji for Team Thor / modern emulation handhelds. Genuinely curious what the split is between you guys. And if you want to see the full breakdown of everything you can do with a modded 3DS, go ahead and check out that video down below. And like I mentioned, if you want to see that video where I cover all the cool things you can do with a modded new 3DS, then go ahead and definitely check out that video. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.